Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be comparing the X-T1 versus the X-Pro1. Which one is right for you? Now I'm going to go ahead and say that these two cameras can be had for around $300. I purchased both for $300 each. Now the X-Pro1 was in worse condition. It had more scratches and scuffs, but the sensor was very clean, and so I decided to go ahead and purchase it because that's the most important part of the camera. Now, the X-T1 that I got was in very mint condition, and I'm going to say that it almost looked brand new. The person probably didn't use it as much as, say, the person that used the X-Pro1, but nonetheless, these cameras are in fully working condition and are awesome in terms of the image quality that you can get, which goes to show that you don't always need to have the latest and greatest. You will spend more money on glass in the long run, and that's what's more important. So let's go ahead and compare them. Let's see what the differences are to see which one of these bodies is right for you. Looking at both of these cameras from the top, you can actually see that they are indeed different, and it takes a while to get used to the different systems. Now that being said, when we compare them side by side, you can see that the X-Pro1 has no buttons on the left side, whereas the Fuji X-T1 has the ISO dial as well as the drive dial below. Also note that there is a recording button with the X-T1, and the X-Pro1 has no buttons. To record with the X-Pro1, and yes, you can record with the X-Pro1, you will do this. You will go down to, let's turn on the camera first, drive, and then scroll all the way down to movie mode. Now, you have to have all your settings in place prior to recording. It will not record, or it will not change your settings after you're in movie mode. Another thing is, you have a function button here, which I use for the ISO, and then you have this function button on the X-T1 that is customizable, but it is a Wi-Fi button because the X-T1 has Wi-Fi capabilities, whereas the X-Pro1 simply does not. And so looking at both from the top, you can see what the differences are. Comparing the video quality side by side, I would have to say that the X-Pro1 does look a tad bit better. However, it introduces some artifacts that can be distracting, and so I would not recommend it for professional use. For personal use, I would not hesitate to use either of these cameras. Now looking at both of these cameras, you can see that the X-Pro1 has the OBF EBF up at the front, whereas the Fuji X-T1 has the fake pentaprism hump that houses the EBF. You also see that you have the lever on the X-T1 that you don't have with the X-T1 because there is no OBF. Also, you see with the X-T1 you have this dial up at the front that you do not have here. You have another function button that you do not have with the X-Pro1. Also, you have a PC sync port on this side right here, whereas with the X-Pro1 you're going to have it here on the side. And so those are the differences when looking at these bodies from the front. Now I would say that the X-Pro1 definitely looks sleeker with smaller lenses, and I would say that even with larger lenses, as long as they're not 50 to 140 or 100 to 400, it's going to look good. I've actually mounted the 90mm f2 to the X-Pro1, and it feels okay. It's not too heavy. It feels like it's an okay lens to mount to the X-Pro1. So as long as you have an idea of what your setup is and how much weight you think you can carry, I would say you could go as high as the 90mm f2 or the 55 to 200 f3.5 to 4.8 on the X-Pro1, and it'll do just fine. So don't be scared to think that you can only use primes or smaller primes with the X-Pro1, because you could use slightly bigger lenses as well. Now with the X-T1, you can see here I have the 23mm f1.4 and it looks fantastic. It looks like it fits with the X-T1. It feels great in the hand. It also feels very capable, and I would say that these two have different handling, but if you want to have the best of both worlds, here it is. You have an SLR style camera and a rangefinder style camera. Now this is how it would look from the front, the X-T1 and the X-Pro1. Now when we look at the rear of these cameras, you'll find that there's a lot of differences between these two cameras. Now with the similarities, you do have that D-pad in the same location as well as the display back button. Also, you'll have the AFL about in the same location. If we look at the X-T1, you have it up here at the top, whereas the X-Pro1 has it by this thumb rest right here. Those are basically all the similarities they share. Everything else is completely different. If we look at the play button, for instance, you have it right on top of the D-pad, whereas with the X-T1 you have the Q menu. The X-T1 has the play button right by the trash can button, as well as the ISO dial, and so it's a little bit different. You have to get used to going back and forth between these two systems. Now unfortunately, the drive is on the X-Pro1, this button right here, but then they have a double function because you can magnify, basically zoom in or zoom out with these two buttons, whereas with the X-T1 you just simply use this rear dial back here. Now when we turn on these cameras, okay, if you can see, everything is slightly older. The interface looks older on the X-Pro1. Also, the rear LCD is not that, how would I say this? It's not bad. It's just, it's not the same image quality that you get with the X-T1. The X-T1 definitely has a better LCD screen. It also has a higher resolution screen, and so it looks nicer. But I wouldn't necessarily consider the X-Pro1 to be bad per se. Now, the X-Pro1 has a fixed screen, whereas the X-T1 does have a tiltable screen. So we can tilt it. Let's get it out here. We can tilt it 90 degrees, and also if we tilt it down, we can tilt it 45 degrees. Looking at the EVF, you can see here that the EVF on the X-Pro1 and /OVF is a lot smaller than your X-T1. The X-T1 definitely has a bigger magnification than the X-Pro1, and also looks nicer. It has better image quality, and also it helps when you're doing your focus peaking, because unfortunately focus peaking on the X-Pro1 is just not as good as I had hoped. And so I'd rather not use focus peaking with the X-Pro1 because it is not accurate as with the X-T1. Now we'll be looking at some samples where the X-Pro1 and the X-T1, we're going to be looking through the viewfinder. My apologies in advance. I know that my iPhone is not going to do it justice, but that is the only camera that I can use to record the OVF, EVF, so you guys can get an idea of what it really looks like. And so let's get to it. When looking through the X-T1's EVF, you can see that it's actually pretty big and bright. It does have face and eye detect, but not as sophisticated as the X-T1 or the X-T2. That being said, more often than not, it will nail focus. It's actually a really nice feature to have in a 2014 camera. Additionally, the focus peaking is surprisingly good for a 2014 camera, and it's leaps and bounds ahead of the X-Pro1's focus peaking. Unfortunately, I was not able to record the focus peaking of the X-Pro1, but needless to say, it's not very good. And finally, when looking through the X-Pro1's OVF/EVF, we can see that in this case, I'm getting the framing lines for my 35mm f1.4. Depending on the lens, the framing lines will change.
Also, depending on the lens might protrude from the bottom right corner. Now when looking at the EVF, I have to say it's not stellar, it's not the highest resolution EVF out there, but it's not meant to be. It's an EVF from 2012, and as such, I think that it performs excellently for what it is. So when we look at the bottom of these cameras, you can see that the tripod plate, or the tripod socket rather, is right next to the battery compartment, which is a bummer because every time I mount this camera to my tripod, if I need to change the battery or the SD card, I have to remove the mounting plate. That's not the case with the X-T1. It also depends on the size of your plate, because if it's big, then you're going to have to remove it anyway. But the good thing is that looking here to the side, you have your SD card slot on the side with easy access, so you don't have to necessarily fiddle around with the tripod mount unless it's really big and you need to change your battery. Another cool thing about the X-T1 that the X-Pro1 does not have is the ability to add a battery grip. That battery grip will extend your battery life and also give you a beefier grip to mount those heavier lenses. Now that being said, you can still mount heavier lenses like I mentioned previously, the XF 90mm f2 as well as the XF 55-200 f3.5 to 4.8. Those lenses are quite big but are still manageable on the X-Pro1, so I shouldn't really, or you shouldn't really worry about it. Rather, it's unless you were trying to mount maybe like the 50-140 or something like the 100-400, then you'll definitely see that the X-Pro1 is just not suited for that. But other than that, that's pretty much it for the body comparison. Now we're going to be looking at some sample images to see what the differences are between the X-Trans 1 and X-Trans 2 sensor. In this studio comparison, we can see that the X-Pro1 is warmer than the X-T1. It also has softer skin tones and tonal gradations. The X-T1 in comparison has more contrast and more saturation when using the same film simulation profile. Now when we look at these images at 50%, we can see that the X-T1 is slightly sharper than the X-Pro1, but the difference is minimal. In this cityscape, we can see that the X-Pro1 is warmer than the X-T1 and also renders the blues slightly different, whereas the X-T1 looks a bit punchy, the X-Pro1 looks more pastel in color. When looking at greenery, we can see that the X-T1 has more punch and vibrance in the greens, whereas the X-Pro1 renders greens in a softer way with less saturation and they look more pastel. In this test, we're looking for moire, and in this case, because of the X-Trans array, there is no moire to be found. Now looking at 100%, these images show that the X-Pro1 looks slightly cleaner than the X-T1, which is surprising.
Alright, well, final thoughts. These cameras are really good for the price, and for $300 or thereabout, you can't really go wrong with either of these lenses. I'm going to be keeping the X-Pro1 simply because I enjoy the handling, I enjoy the OVF, and also I enjoy the colors that come out of this sensor. The X-Trans 1 sensor has some magic when it comes to the colors and the monochrome. The colors are not really film-like a lot of people want to claim, but they're more pastel in rendering. They have smoother tonal gradations that the X-T1 doesn't have. The X-T1 has punchier colors with more saturation and more contrast. And so that's why I'm not going to keep it. And another reason why I'm not going to keep it is because it's not fast enough. Now I'll explain why. And it might be fast enough for you, but it's not for me. So I have a 2-year-old and she likes to run around, and when I'm taking pictures, this camera can't keep up. The X-T20, for instance, could keep up, and that would rarely miss a shot. With the X-T20, I find that I have a lower keeper rate than with the X-T20. Now that's to be expected, it's a newer camera, but the fact that this is the pro body and then the next generation consumer body is outperforming this, I don't know, it's up to you and your definition of fast. If it's fast enough for you, then great. For me, I think that it's not fast enough, and even though I don't use the X-Pro1 to take pictures of my daughter because it doesn't keep up, I think that for what I use this camera for, it's a really good camera. I have to say that it feels good. Just go test one out. If you can rent one, just rent it, see how it feels. You might not like the whole OVF experience, but you might find that it's actually a really good OVF and you'll use it a lot. And so that's been it. I'll also be doing reviews of these lenses, the 35mm, not 35, the 23mm f1.4. This lens is one of my favorite lenses and the lens that I use the most because of the rendering as well as low light gathering, and the 18mm f2, which I'd have to say that a lot of people crap on this lens for whatever reason. I find that the 35mm f2 performs worse than this lens when it comes to corner sharpness. So yeah, I don't know why people crap on this lens. I think this lens is fantastic. It's a very small, wide prime. I wish it was 1.4, but that's besides the point. Again, if you like what you saw here, please give it a like, subscribe. Also, please hit the bell notification icon so you get notified when these videos are released. Thanks for watching.
Please hit like if you like this video. Also hit subscribe and the bell notification so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching.